and Prevention Division.
Okay.
So,
All right, we're live.
And that's still within DEC?
it is. So the Waste Management and Prevention Division's I'm not in here very often, so let me just go ahead and step back and tell you a little bit about who I am and what we do. So I'm in the Waste Management and Prevention Division. We deal with solid waste, so hazardous waste, contaminated sites. So I deal with things like PFAS in Bennington or PFAS in other parts of the state. We deal with biosolids, so that may be a topic we want to touch on, and then underground and above ground storage tanks. So those are sort of the issues, basically toxic and hazardous chemicals and sort of their use and operation in the environment, or how we store and manage the waste products from them.
You deal with food waste and composting?
Yes, sir.
Scrap? Oh, you need to spend a few days right here with us.
I would be more than happy to. I am, of course, a Teams user, not a Zoom user, so I've got to remind myself every time I do this how to share my screen. So
It's there you go.
there we go. I got it. And then let me go ahead and start. So I'm going to go quickly through this. This may be a little repetitive from when Mike gave his testimony. And I will share this document. The agency is sort of the lead throughout state government on how PFAS gets managed. And one of the things that we've done is developed what we call the Vermont PFAS Roadmap. I'll share a copy with you. It's a fairly easy to read document, but at its core, it's the four things that you see on the screen. Reducing PFAS in sort of consumer products or industrial uses. So we've worked with the the Department of Health and the Attorney General's office on product bans. And we could talk a little bit about what's been banned and how that's working. We also operate a pretreatment program. So we work with sort of heavy industry that uses chemicals in their manufacturing process, looks what's coming out sort of the back end, and work with them on either chemical substitution or treatment and management of that material before it gets out into the environment. And PFAS is sort of a key area that we work on there. Identifying sources of PFAS. So we'll talk through a little bit like the major media, so groundwater, surface water, and waste materials, what we're looking at and where the potential issues are, how we protect Vermonters, and then frankly, trying to encourage the federal government to have a larger leadership role in trying to phase PFAS out of the numerous things that PFAS is used in, and coming up with better substitutes and a better regulatory regime, because states can lead on these things, but we can't do it all ourselves.
John.
I just wondered, are they essentially PFAS salespeople out there? I mean, it's interesting how in that sort of scientific world, how here's a problem, right, in a lab, and we're like, okay, like HDPE, it's like, wow, we should really use PFAS, ions here because it gets the job done.
Sure. So PFASs were developed a long time ago. Depending on where you want to look, it's anywhere from the 30s to the 50s. They started becoming in much more common use in the 50s. My understanding, and I'm certainly don't often work with chemical manufacturers, but normally people are looking at like, I need a chemical product that can do these functions in the industrial process that I'm having. And then the chemical manufacturer sort of manufactures that product. There's not like sort of I want PFAS, or there are occasionally, I don't want PFAS in this product. And more that's the case, right? And again, when we're talking about PFAS, and maybe it's good to take just like one step back. When we say PFAS, there are currently 5 or 6 PFAS that we regulate. So we have numeric standards that we regulate those. There are about 40 PFAS that we can test for. So the existing EPA testing methodologies allow us to sort of quantitatively pick up those. And I should say, in drinking water or surface water, it gets a lot harder once you move out of sort of the water medium to test for PFAS. And then there are, depending on who you want to talk to, somewhere in the range of 40,000 PFAS is out in commercial products, right? So in commerce. And some of those are very boutique and they're only used in a very sort of limited way. I've seen industry say there's more like 16,000 that are out and regularly in use. So, but it's a lot. There are a lot of different chemical formulations that are out there and in use. So like I said, I'm really going to focus on three areas: drinking water, surface water, and soil amendments. And in soil amendments, I'm just going to talk a little bit about biosolids, digestate, compost, manures. So drinking water is frankly the area that we've been involved in the most and the longest. We actually have numeric standards adopted for the management of drinking water, both in groundwater and in so potable water supplies and in public water supplies. You see the numbers there. There's basically, these are the 2024 EPA MCL numbers, maximum contaminant level. So these are the health values that EPA came up with. And some of them, frankly, aren't health values. They're practical, what we can practically get down to from a quantitative level for regulatory purposes.
In terms of measuring.
In terms of measuring, yes.
Thank you, Chair. So I know you've tested water extensively down in Bennington County.
Yes, sir.
What about those of us that may be in line of sight of the Coventry landfill and have a deep well? Can we have our wells tested somehow, some way?
So let's sort of unwind a little bit. So Bennington's not an isolated incident, but it's a good illustration of an industrial process that used PFAS in a manufacturing process that had an airborne emission. That airborne emission basically cast the PFAS in a much broader area than with what we would call sort of traditional point sources. And I'll just put Coventry sort of in there. We don't, there are some PFAS issues right around Coventry. We think they're primarily from the old Nadu landfill that's there from back when Nadu ran the landfill. We have enough wells out there that we feel pretty confident that all of that contamination is on site, so it's confined. So we would certainly support, in other words, help you understand data that you want to collect yourselves. And we can tell you where to do sampling and how to do the sampling. And we're certainly working on trying to build additional capacity in the state with the health lab and others so that it's easier for people to test for PFAS. But unless we think there is a contaminant source that's impacting your well, we typically won't have the state pay for that. Now, having said that, and I flip forward a little quickly just to show you, so this is sort of the private versus public water supplies. So we about 60% of Vermonters get their water through public water supplies, about 40 get it through private. This shows you a little bit, we have about 3% of our systems have exceeded, and I haven't recalculated this since the standards have changed, but 3% of the systems have exceeded our prior MCL, and about 15% of the systems have some detectable level of PFAS in them in the public water supply realm. For private water supplies, Vermont did a randomized sample of private water supply wells to try and get a better understanding of what's out there. And this basically shows you the results. So about 2% of the wells that we tested exceed the 20 part per trillion, our prior MCL. About 4% exceed the current standard. and about 23% have some detectable level of PFAS in them. And I'm going to talk a little bit more as we go through here about what we think is going on. But I would say from my perspective, you really don't ever want any PFAS in your drinking water supply. No one really, it's a man-made chemical. People don't want to see it there. I think that we set regulatory standards as per state action, and then we work with people to try and do what can be done to reduce the levels as low as we can possibly get them beyond that.
The reason I asked Matt
Yeah.
is I can see your trash rolling into Coventry from my house.
Understood. Understood.
I'm right above South Bay
Okay.
with a 250-foot deep well. I'm from my house, I'm below the bottom of South Bay in my well.
I'm happy to talk with folks back at the office. I mean, my sense is
And I don't mind paying for the test.
we can certainly, to be clear, we could certainly help that happen, right? We have, and I don't have them with me, but we have all the resources about where to test, who to call to test. We can help people, including yourself, get a test taken so that you have data and you know what's in your well. So we can absolutely help with that. Okay.
Hopefully nothing's in my well.
I hope nothing's in your well too.
Feel fine.
So transitioning away from groundwater and into surface water and focusing primarily on publicly owned treatment work, sort of municipal wastewater treatment facilities. So the state of Vermont, again, we've basically tested every wastewater treatment facility in the state of Vermont for at least, I think, 4 quarters at this point. And every wastewater treatment facility has detectable levels of PFAS in it. There is no wastewater treatment facility that does not have PFAS. And then you see the averages of those. It's 26 parts per trillion going into the wastewater treatment facility and 68 parts per trillion coming out. And it's like, well, why is that? To some degree, we think there are some processes that are going on that are basically taking PFAS we can't see and turning them into PFAS that we can see. So it's what we call terminal products. So you're taking things that are PFAS that are in that group of 40,000 and turning them into the 40 that we can see.
Is that effluent, meaning the solids and the liquids?
We'll get to the solids. So effluent, when we talk about effluent, we're talking about the liquid being discharged from the wastewater treatment facility. And then we'll talk about the biosolids, which is the solid component of the material.
Liquid. Is that outputted to the river?
It's going to the river, to the lake, to the receiving water that the wastewater treatment facility discharges into. And I should say these numbers are similar or lower than what you would see in household septic, domestic septic. So it's the same. We're seeing the same sorts of things, whether it's wastewater treatment facilities or it's septic. And just sort of jumping ahead, the source is us. It's the clothes you wash, the cleaners you use, the rugs in your house, the other things that are basically getting discharged ultimately to your septic system or your wastewater system, and it ends up getting into that, which is again why the first thing on our list of things to do is to get PFAS out, phase it out of as many products and product classes as we possibly can.
Matt, just quickly, we haven't actually talked about this, but we've worked a lot in this committee on baby food and infant formula this time with heavy toxic metals. Are PFAS more dangerous for children and babies? Or is it like all of us, like Richard as well, it's dangerous to him?
I mean, so generally speaking, as a general rule, I'm not the Department of Health and try not to play one in committee, but I mean, like the area when we were setting the PFAS standards, we're primarily, or one of the target groups is pregnant mothers and nursing mothers, right? So the youngest sort of age group that we're talking about. And again, part of that is water consumption versus body weight, right? Because your intake is much higher based on your body weight. So the answer is that's an area that we're definitely concerned about. PFAS aren't good for anybody. So these risks are risks that exist for the typical 80-kilogram man, as well as sort of smaller risk populations. So, you're welcome. So this is sort of so basically we sort of did the easy work, which is testing at the influent and effluent of every POTW. We actually are doing a phase 2 on this, which is we've selected a number of wastewater treatment facilities, and we're actually going into the collection network and seeing whether there are specific industrial sources that are driving higher PFAS numbers in certain community systems. We've done this already, sort of pre-existing the work that's going on, because this work is actually the sewer sampling is going on right now. We've done that before, and it basically showed that most of the massive PFAS that is going into these systems is coming from residential areas. It's surprisingly less industrial. I mean, we will see hotspots, but yeah, it is not industrial sources that are driving the PFAS loading. All right, so everybody's favorite topic, biosolids. So biosolids are the solid component. So you've got the effluent that's discharged, then you have the solid component from a wastewater treatment facility.
Matt, sorry, just to go back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we leave effluent altogether, whatever's coming out in the effluent,
Yes.
68 parts per trillion on average, that's just going out into the world. That's not
It's just
filtered any further.
there is not treatment that is going on at the wastewater treatment facility for PFAS at this time. And I should add, there is not a surface water standard for PFAS in Vermont or federally today. So that's one of the areas where there's not there's not a regulatory sort of control on wastewater treatment facilities. People think like the drinking water standard and sometimes superimpose it on surface water. It's not a good thing to do, mainly only because drinking water assumes you're drinking it every day at a certain quantity over your life. There's much less sort of ingestion of surface water. And so it's actually more often driven by ecological factors. How does it affect the fish? How does it affect, benthic macroinvertebrates, sort of the other things in the environment that PFAS might adversely affect? All right, biosolids. I think we started our biosolids journey in like 2019, so almost 10 years ago at this point. And when we started, there were 30 sites, 14 permits. Not to get into it, multiple fields are permitted under a single, or multiple fields are permitted under a single permit. When we started, there were 14. Today, there's like 4 biosolid sites. We basically required everyone to have testing, compliance monitoring at a down gradient well that we were basically using to monitor PFAS compliance. We found that 22% of 22% of the sites had a well that tested above standard, and at that point, we put them basically on a much more in-depth sampling regimen and manage them much closer. A lot of those facilities ended up deciding they didn't want to go forward. We also then tested at these either farms or other sites that were land applying all of the private drinking water supplies in and around, and we didn't find any impact. So to the extent that things were happening there, it was very localized and for the most part on site or right off site. As a result of that, we have adopted in 2024 what we call the interim strategy for management of biosolids. Now, this primarily focuses on Class A biosolids or EQ biosolids, which are basically the biosolids that are managed without a permit, right? They've met pathogen reduction levels and have a nutrient value that is beneficial. So historically, before this, we were treating them as a product and not as a waste and letting them go kind of out into the universe. That's changed now. We've basically said that you need to test this material on a representative basis and show that the material that's going to be applied meets background soil values for PFAS. So basically hold the concentration in your biosolids to what you would see in background soil levels, which is it varies depending on what we're talking about 3 parts per billion. Per billion. And to be clear, that's background levels, and it's not just in Vermont. So we were one of the first states to do a background soil study, but New Hampshire, New York, and Massachusetts have all done background ambient soil level testing where there's no known contaminant source, and we're all pretty much in the same range. So we feel like that's likely. It's likely the concentrations that are from either very localized sources, like from aerial deposition globally, or a combination of the two.
Just quickly, I hadn't thought about this either. Have your colleagues at FPR looked into, like, do our forests now, are they taking up PFAS because it's moving in the air and the water?
So the plant uptake pathway generally is not one that I am much an expert on, and it's not as well defined, in my opinion, as some of the other pathways. I know Steve is coming in. I don't know whether Pam is coming in tomorrow, but if Pam is looking much more at the plant uptake sort of pathway, and she's a good person to have a conversation about that with. So we basically are holding people to background. We're also basically requiring siting restrictions on where you use Class A biosolids. So it basically, you need to use it in an area where there's seasonal high groundwater. We have siting requirements on seasonal high groundwater and drinking water supplies. And then we also are requiring the location of where it was applied, the amount it was applied, and sort of a description of what's going on. So it's basically, there's no such thing as an unregulated biosolid anymore going forward. It's weird. I shouldn't say that. We have some de minimis non-regulatory. I can't remember exactly. I think it might be 50 cubic yards, but anything more than that, you need to report to the agency on what's going on. And I guess just before, I think it's not necessarily a goal, but I think it's been the effect, and we certainly have encouraged it, is moving away from the use of this material in an agricultural setting and moving towards its use as a manufactured topsoil in sort of more institutional or commercial or construction projects. So if a road is going in and they need to revegetate and need topsoil to do it, rather than scraping the native loam off nearby farms using a manufactured topsoil, we think it has a benefit from that perspective. We are not encouraging, though not prohibiting either, agricultural application.
Greg?
This is familiar, but the background level that you mentioned,
Yes.
that's getting generated possibly from rainwater as well.
So it could be localized sources. So it could be frankly, from chemical manufacturing plants in Ohio or North Carolina. So there's a wide number of things but yes, ultimately being deposited by rainwater onto the soils.
I don't know when the conversation stopped happening, but I remember as a child learning about acid rain.
It's a similar concept. It's PFAS is interesting. It does. I had never, so in 2016, when I first started dealing with PFAS, it was rare or non-existent that we dealt with a contaminant that would deposit through aerial deposition and cause groundwater problems like we see with PFAS. We hadn't seen it. It is in some ways incredibly problematic and unique in that way. So there are probably my staff are probably cringing, and there's probably some other contaminant, right? That's equally has these properties, but yeah, it's a real problem contaminant.
Has any testing been done on the old sludge receiving sites? Like, we talked about Coventry, you have the landfill, you have the old landfill down below. Up above that land adjacent to the landfill received sludge for years and years and years and years.
So I think the sludge receiving sites you're talking about have been tested, just because I think they might have even still been in use when our program first started. Don't quote me on that, but we have all the data. You'll see their blue links in here. I tried to link through to the reports and other things. So if you have an interest in diving in deeper, you can click on these when I send it to your committee assistant and try and dive deeper into some of these areas. And I'm happy to answer questions either back in committee or just offline. But we have not, I mean, the ones that are sort of the recent past that have recently been in use, we have some testing data on for the most part. We know there are some that have been out of use for a longer period of time, where maybe the wells have been, knocked over because they've been plowing the field or what have you. And those we may not have data on. But I mean, the ones up in the Coventry area, there are a lot of wells up there.
Okay.
All right. So I think this is where we're leaving soil amendments, but several years ago, we ended up applying for and receiving a EPA pollution prevention grant that allowed us to basically go out and test depackaging slurry. So like the material that comes out of a depackager from organics management, digestate, both from a number of different anaerobic digesters, compost, and then as a part of that, a lot of the manures that were going in there. I will just say I was surprised that we found PFAS in a lot of different manures, chicken, cow, and horse manures, silage, wood chips, and a bunch of other compost inputs at low levels, but it was present in the tens to below 100 parts per trillion, but it was there. And again, if you're interested, you can see some of the data that's there. It's a long report that is not, it's not written in plain language and necessarily the easiest to advance.
Wood chips, so to John's question.
Yeah.
Uptake into trees.
So I think the data is out there that there's plant uptake. I will just say I don't understand that pathway as well. I mean, it's more complicated, and I think it's concentration dependent and it's location dependent, and it's actually plant dependent, and then you get even more complicated, like the stalk of a corn is fine, but the ears have it. I've heard things like that. So it gets. And again, Pam, I think she's been tied in a little bit more than I have. Maine has done a fair amount of work with respect to plant uptake, and it's certainly an area of impact that I know is out there, but it's not my field, and I defer to my friends at the Agency of Agriculture on that. All right, this is probably small, but it gives you a little bit of a picture of what we've been up to in the product phase out perspective. We started in 2021 with sort of the highest priority products that we knew had PFAS in them and had a high potential of impacting people. So firefighting foam, we tried to make sure that firefighters had notice on the turnout gear. Stay tuned because we came back to turnout gear. Direct contact food packaging, that's actually some of the worst PFAS concentrations we've seen are in direct contact food packaging. And the reason is that your food doesn't stick to the packaging, right? Like, so if you've got a hamburger from some fast food location that you want to be able to get out of the wrapper that it's in, there's often historically been PFAS in there. We've said that they can't intentionally add it to that food packaging anymore. So rugs, carpets, the rugs and carpets are horrible. There's a lot of problems with rugs and carpets. And then lastly, ski wax. There are good alternatives at this point, but ski wax was a high concentration PFAS added product. And then we moved to cosmetics. Again, cosmetics have high concentrations, adult mattresses, apparel, so clothing, which that ban starts next year with some exceptions. Artificial turf, cookware, incontinency protection products, juvenile products, and then more broadly textiles, any textile, and that includes chairs, cushions. We're getting it out of everything at that point in 2027. And then you get into what we passed a couple years last year. So cleaning products, dental floss has PFAS in it, fluorine treated containers. And now we get to actually, rather than just giving notice, we are banning it in firefighters, turnout gear, and respirators as well. There's a distinction between the two. It's harder to get it out of the respirators, unfortunately.
It's a fluorine treated container.
So basically, it's a container. They're often plastic that the inside of the container has been treated with fluorine to increase the length of the life of the floor of the container, and also to protect normally it's a commercial chemical product that is inside the container. Again, Pam and Steve can probably talk to you about this, but so this is the only thing I will say about pesticides today. So a couple years ago, it was pretty well established and shown that there were pesticides inside fluorine treated containers where the container itself was contaminating the pesticide. And so, that was obviously that's a problem. And there was a phase out or a prohibition at the federal level on that, but we also have a corresponding state prohibition.
Maybe you don't know much about this, Matt, but was the list of products banned in 2021 data driven? Did those things rise to the top of here are some obvious ways that it's getting into our water or into ourselves?
I didn't include it, and I'm happy to. There is a study that we required New England Waste Services of Vermont to do to basically analyze the inputs coming into the landfill to show which inputs had the highest concentrations of PFAS in them. And so they did. They basically took a whole bunch of the things that were coming in and started ground them up, and these were the sorts of and that played into our decision-making process. I mean, we knew like things like Class B firefighting foam, we knew that was a problem, and it's been shown to be a problem all throughout the United States. But the rest of the direct contact food packaging and rugs were up at the top. The other thing that was up at the top was textiles, functionally like they call them bulky materials, but it's furniture that's been treated with PFAS to prevent things from staining or sticking on it, which is, again, stepping back. That's really, in a lot of these, what PFAS is used for. It's the stain guard, it's the water resistance. Those are some of the functions and properties it has. And so that's why it's used in a lot of these different applications. It also prevents sort of grease or other things from sticking and staining the material. So that's the end of my presentation. I mean, I'm happy to continue on if folks have other questions or areas of interest or things you want to dive into. I am more than happy.
So our interest in this, in the PFAS question or topic is through the application of pesticides or pesticides that have been in a package that might be treated with PFAS. And to the extent that there's groundwater, possible groundwater contamination. So there's obviously if you're treating something that we're going to eat with a pesticide, there's a possibility for ingestion showing food. But in addition to that, if it rains on a field that's been treated somehow with a PFAS pesticide, does that end up in groundwater and ultimately in somebody's drinking water?
So I think it's probably good to answer that question in the context of the whole sort of agricultural regulatory sort of system that exists for how economic poisons are regulated by the Agency of Agriculture. So if it is an economic poison that is used for in accordance with the manufacturer's label, it is not subject to my jurisdiction as the Department of Environmental Conservation. Like if you contaminated groundwater on a farm because you used the pesticide the way you were supposed to use the pesticide, that's something that ag manages, not DEC. If there is an illegal disposal operation, in other words, you have 25 drums of pesticide that you left in a barn that degraded and is an environmental issue, that is my issue, right? You didn't use it in accordance with the manufacturer's instruction. It's a waste management related issue. Ag and us, we work collaboratively on trying to deal with those types of problems when those problems come up. So,
John.
I was just thinking about all the firefighting things. Is it, from what I know about, if a mobile home burns up, it's not a place you would want to be as far as toxics go. When PFAS, are ignited or burn at high temperatures, do they get worse?
So PFAS are heat resistant. I'm not going to say they're not, and they're water resistant. It's part of the reason they're used in firefighting foams and in firefighter turnout gear. Well, in the foams, they actually do a good job of basically suppressing a fire and smothering it. In the turnout gear, it's mainly for the breathability and water resistance of the material that they're using.
I was thinking about rubs.
Burning
it,
yeah,
they're burning what?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that they are probably going to become aerosolized and airborne at that point. And they are going to get up and I don't know that I've actually seen any study that looks at during like a common house fire, what you're talking about as far as air emissions from PFAS. So, but I have to imagine, for PFAS to be thermally destroyed, right? And I put air quotes around that because I'm not actually sure that they are destroyed. You need to get up to temperatures around 2000, 2200 Fahrenheit. So cement kiln, hazardous waste incinerator levels of temperatures. And the reason I put quotes around it is because there was at least some experimental work going on by EPA down in North Carolina that showed that in a lab setting, when they basically heated it up that hot or hotter, that it was still there, but it was breaking down into 3-chain, 2-chain, smaller things that we couldn't see, but they were still what people might define as being PFASs.
Yes. I'm glad you mentioned 3-chain, 2-chain. A lot of some reading I've done in the agricultural economic poisons, they call them single chains.
I'm gonna so Pam's the agronomic toxicologist, and she can probably walk you through how things are used in an ag setting and the chemistry around it better than I can. I'm a lawyer, so I don't even try to play some of like the chemistry portion of things. So I don't know about I haven't heard of a 1-chain. Normally, I'm not saying that it's not out there, but I haven't heard of that. Normally when in the sort of industrial chemistry, so you're looking at 8-chain, 6-chain, and 4-chain PFAS compounds. And that's how many carbons are linked to a fluorine atom. When we're talking about that, and there's then there's like I said, there's a wide range of chemistries that are out there that people use. That's right.
So in our bill, H911, part of it says in containers or in packaging, products packaging. That will be going away in 2027 unless it's changed.
So PFAS and fluorinated containers, right? So it's sort of bifurcated into 2 steps. Step 1 is if you're taking a product that is banned and storing it in a fluorinated container, you can't do that as of 2027. So think if I have a cosmetic and I'm basically I can't put it in a fluorinated container as of next year. It's 2030 for all other commercial chemical products that would cover pesticides at that point, but it would also cover any other industrial process taking place in the state of Rhode Island.
Right? If we've run out of.
Easy stuff.
I did want to just say that, first of all, give credit to your colleagues who have been on the ground in Bennington for a decade dealing with this issue. Richard and I think Richard's partner in crime retired at some point because.
Yeah, John. Yes.
Right. And Malika more recently, but just so responsive, very, very helpful. I hear that all the time from people, how helpful they've been throughout the years. And the testing, my understanding, you had earlier put up a figure of 500 or so random tests that were done.
So those were tests done where we didn't know that there was a source of PFAS. I would need to look. I didn't look before we came, but we're well over 1,000. I mean, we're probably over 2,000 tests of areas where we're trying to conduct an environmental investigation to figure out what's going on from a contaminant source.
And in one of those cases where there was a positive test result, it was in Shaftesbury. So I happened to know about it. And then you stepped up and began testing more widely.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, to be really clear, the 500 random tests that we did, part of what stemmed us, frankly, getting engaged in Bennington again, is we started seeing, just again, it was a random sort of test. It would, statistically randomized, but there happened to be 2 wells in relatively close proximity in sort of the southeast-ish part of Bennington, the town of Bennington. And we're like, well, wait a second, what's going on here, right? Like we're seeing concentrations we wouldn't expect. And I'm like, well, let's test more. right? Which is frankly, when we see things like that, let's expand the circle of what's going on. And it showed us that there's more of a problem than we thought there was when things ended in 2017, 18, when we sort of stopped the last round of.
Would you equate this to like radon? You know, people get home kits, or you can hire someone to come in and test your house for radon. Which is probably naturally occurring.
Yeah.
And you can ventilate to mitigate it, but, I'm thinking of, Chair Durfee lives, you have a deep well at your house?
We are on, the town water. Okay.
Yeah. People in Coventry, and sorry for keep using Coventry over,
Oh, it's-
it's right in my front yard.
Sure.
And people around other places in the state got down to Innervale,
Mhm.
the National Guard and the fire.
Mhm.
The phones there. Is there a way people could, like I said, can't imagine it's too outlandishly expensive to test your water for PFAS, but.
It's not cheap. I mean, so, so I don't know where the tests are right now. It's in the $300 to $500 range for a PFAS test.
That's a couple hundred more than I thought it'd be.
Right. It's there. I mean, generally speaking, that's high for an environmental test. They're also kind of hard to collect because if you're wearing your winter jacket, you might cross-contaminate it. If you don't use the right container, some of the containers are plastic and they have PFAS in them. Sometimes the tubing has PFAS in them. So you have to be careful with how you do the collection and how you manage the sample. But you can do it. And there are, I think it's more complicated and in some ways much more difficult than radon. I mean, you're looking at just ventilation at that point. You're looking at, the main concern that we have from PFAS is ingestion and specifically drinking water ingestion. The good news is that installing a carbon treatment system will address that issue, but that's a long-term and a not inexpensive sort of solution for people.
Good. Well, thank you for coming in. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. And if questions arise, I'm happy to come back.
Great.
All right.
And those tests are just looking at those, what, four, 5, 6 things?
Well, no, I mean, so you can do a test and you can get up to 40 compounds in. So now you may come back and say, well, I've got like a 25 of this particular contaminant. And I'll look at you and say, well, it's not regulatory. So something's going on, but you don't have, and to be clear, none of them are good for you. We just haven't we don't have enough information on how these chemicals, I shouldn't say that. We haven't come to a point where we've established sort of toxicological environmental standards. It's a process we go through to do that. And we aren't there for anything but the 5 or 6 that we have.
Are they worse than PCBs? North Country High School, I'm on school board.
I know you are. I know you are actually. I wouldn't really want either. And I think I would say that it's easier for me to treat my drinking water than it is to stop breathing.
Fair
Right.
enough. Fair enough.
Worst feeling Paraquat.
Yeah.
Yes, they're riskier than Paraquat.
Really depressing.
Paraquat proceeds
We better wrap up.
unless you drink it.
Thank you.